Hello everyone, welcome to Spinal Cord Lab Introduction number 1. In this mini lecture we're going to introduce the spinal cord and look at its longitudinal anatomy as well as some of the major nerves and plexuses associated with the spinal cord. Before we get into the details of the spinal cord, let's remind you that the spinal cord is part of the central nervous system. It is essentially an extension of the brain that runs superiorly from the foramen magnum, inferiorly to the upper lumbar region of the vertebral column. It is contained within the vertebral canal, which is created by all of the vertebral foramen stacking one on top of another. Right? Connected to the spinal cord, right, there are many nerves known as peripheral nerves. Right? These nerves are part of the peripheral nervous system. They can be seen here in yellow on the diagram. Right? They extend through the limbs, both the upper and lower limb, as well as through the trunk. Right? What these peripheral nerves are doing is they are carrying sensory information, in other words, afferent information, towards the spinal cord and into the CNS, or in other cases they are carrying outgoing motor information, or in other words efferent information, out to muscles and other effectors. And so keep in mind that as we look at the spinal cord, we're going to see the interaction between peripheral nervous system structures and central nervous system structures. Let's take a look at the length of the spinal cord. If you look at the image on the left, the spinal cord is shown in pink, and you can see that the inferior end of the spinal cord, right, is cone-shaped, and this inferior cone-shaped end of the spinal cord is known as the conus medullaris. Extending off of the very tip of the conus medullaris, there's a strand of connective tissue made of fibrous connective tissue known as the filum terminale. And the filum terminale extends off the conus and attaches to the skeletal structure of the sacrum and coccyx, kind of anchoring the inferior end of the spinal cord so it's physically supported. In yellow, what you can see is spinal nerves, right? Those spinal nerves are parts of the peripheral nervous system. And what happens is between each vertebrae, there are going to be a pair of spinal nerves emerging from the vertebral canal through the intervertebral foramen. These are structures that we introduced in the skeletal labs. Only the beginning of the spinal nerves are shown for the sake of clarity. When you look at the inferior end of the spinal cord, right, where the conus medullaris is, the spinal cord comes to an end, but the vertebral column continues. And so you have a set of long spinal nerves that are extending beyond the length of the spinal cord to emerge out of the intervertebral foramen of the lower lumbar vertebrae and the sacral foramina. Collectively, right? Collectively, all of these long nerves that extend off of the inferior end of the spinal cord collectively make up a structure called the cauda equina, which roughly translates into horse's tail, because it kind of looks like the strands of a horse's tail. Or if you think of somebody who's wearing their hair in a ponytail, you have all of the hair emerging from the central point where the hair tie would be, and then it radiates outwards, right? And so all of those elongated nerves at the bottom of the spinal cord are called the cauda equina. And we'll touch on kind of some of the functional and clinical significance of that in the lecture. You can see the relationship between the nerves of the cauda equina and the skeletal structure. Here on the diagram in the center of your screen, you can see the sacrum right there, and you can see how the spinal cord ends right around there, and you have nerves extending down and out through the sacral foramina, right, out between the spaces of the vertebra. The same thing is happening up in this region. They're simply not showing the lumbar vertebrae. Now, we'll get into the details of the names of some of these specific nerves, or some of the details as we look at the cross-sectional anatomy of the spinal cord. But once a nerve emerges from the vertebral canal, what happens is that nerves from many different segments of the spinal cord will branch and merge with other nerves from different segments of the spinal cord. So, for example, you can see here, right, in purple, you can see there's a nerve coming out of the cervical region, and then in red, here's another nerve coming out of the cervical region, and you can see how those nerves merge together, right? And then you can see how those merges split. And so what that creates is that creates a region where nerves are kind of branching and merging and branching again. And that is referred to as a plexus. There are 4 plexuses associated with the spine. And the term plexus is a general term that refers to a branching network. And so you can see that the term plexus used in other contexts as well. Here we're talking about the plexuses associated with the spinal cord. So there's 4 plexuses. There's the cervical plexus, which is formed from the 1st through 4th spinal nerves. There is the brachial plexus, right, which is created by nerves from the 5th cervical through the 1st thoracic vertebra. And then you can also see a lumbar vertebra and a sacral plexus. Together, the lumbar plexus and the sacral plexus are sometimes referred to as the lumbosacral plexus. Right? Notice that the sacral plexus and the lumbar plexus do overlap a little bit. The 4th lumbar spinal nerve contributes to both. When we look at these plexuses, you can see them on the diagram. Right? This interbranching is the cervical plexus. This interbranching is the brachial plexus. This interbranching is the lumbar plexus. And there is the sacral plexus. As you're going to need to be familiar with these plexuses and identify them on images and diagrams. Something worth noting is that the sacral plexus passes posterior to the pelvis, right? Whereas the lumbar plexus is going to pass anterior to the pelvis. So I'm just abbreviating post to pelvis, and the lumbar plexus passes anterior to the pelvis. We have a model of this, we have a model depicting the spinal cord and the various plexuses. This image will be posted on Canvas so you can study it by itself. It will, or don't be surprised if this pops up in quizzes and exams. So This image on the left, you can see the entire model. What we're going to do is we're going to zoom in just on this part here in the cervical region, and that's what I have a close-up of on the right side of the screen. Okay? When we look at this right side of the screen, we can see both the brachial plexus and the cervical plexus. I'm going to start with the brachial plexus because it sticks out and it's easy to identify. Right? So that's the brachial plexus. Right? You can see it here on the model. Right? You'll notice that the right, or I should say the left side of the model and the right side of the model, they look slightly differently. The left side is showing you a deeper view, the right side is showing you a more superficial view. So that accounts for some of the differences between the two sides of the model. You can see, I want to focus in next on the cervical plexus. Right? If you look, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4. So that right there is forming the cervical plexus. Right? There's one nerve you need to know in the cervical plexus, and it's only shown on one side of the diagram. It is the phrenic nerve, and the phrenic nerve innervates the diaphragm. It's bilateral. There's going to be another one on the other side, right around there, but they're only showing it to you on one side of the model. This innervates the diaphragm, which is the primary muscle that's involved with producing ventilation. Let's go ahead and look at this model again. I've turned the model on its side so I can blow it up a little bit. Keep in mind that the right side of your screen is the superior end of the model. We can see the brain right there. And the left side of the screen is the inferior end of the body. Okay? And we can see the brachial plexus, which we looked at before. Okay? We're not going to worry about any of the details of the brachial plexus other than just identifying it. We also can see the cervical plexus, including the phrenic nerve. Okay. And I want to direct our attention down to the inferior end, where we are going to look at the lumbar and the sacral plexus. I'm going to start, I think, with a relatively easy to identify structure. I want you to notice this nerve right there. That is the femoral nerve. Right? It's actually lying on top of the iliacus muscle, which is part of the iliopsoas. And if you follow this nerve up, you'll notice that it's derived from this cluster of nerves right there. That cluster of nerves is the lumbar plexus. Right? You can see the femoral nerve on the other side of the model right there, slightly hidden by the psoas major muscle. Right? Notice that both of these nerves are going to pass across the anterior portion of the pelvis. If you might recognize the iliac crest right there. Right? Now, if we look down here, right, this cluster of nerves, those make up the sacral plexus. In fact, you can begin to see the biggest nerve of the sacral plexus right there. That is the sciatic nerve, which we'll look at in more detail in just a second. Right? So you can see the sciatic nerve a little bit more clearly now that I've erased a couple things. Right? These these plexuses continue to form some specific named nerves. On this image from your lab manual, you can see this nerve right here, which is running along the pinky finger side of the limb. Remember, the pinky finger is associated with your ulna, so that is that's going to be the ulnar nerve. Okay. And then right here, this nerve, and you'll notice that this nerve runs right down through the palm of the hand, right through the center of the wrist. It's running through the midline of your forearm, and the word that refers to the midline is medial, and so you can use that to help you remember or identify this is the median nerve. Right? You also need to know the radial nerve, but the radial nerve runs posteriorly through the upper extremity, and so it's not visible in this anterior view. If you're following along in the lab manual, or if you want to refer to the lab manual, these nerves and the plexuses are found on page 106 through 107 of the lab manual. You'll notice that the lab manual also includes the sympathetic chain and ganglia. I don't think those are clearly presented on any of the lab material, so I'll discuss those in lecture, and we don't need to worry about those for the lab. If we look at this image and we take a look at some of the major nerves of the upper limb in relationship to the muscles, right? You can see that we have the ulnar nerve. We have the ulnar nerve. Oh, well, let me try that again. We're doing this all in one take, folks. We don't have time to stop and start. We have the ulnar nerve, right? And then we have the median nerve, right? Notice how they're both running medial to the biceps brachii, which hopefully is recognizable right there, right? And so we have the ulnar nerve running right along there, and then we have the median nerve running right along there across the elbow pit, right? We can see those on this side as well, right? We have the median nerve running there towards the medial forearm, and then we have the ulnar nerve coming right in through there, right? Running towards the pinky side, or running on the pinky side of the hand, right? When we look at this model right here, this photograph of the model, we are looking at it in medial view. So this is the palm of the hand. Right? As we continue down into the lower limbs, I want to show you the femoral nerve. Let's move from left to right. We can see the femoral nerve here in the diagram, right? And it's coming right there, right? You'll notice that the coloration gets more muted, and you can see these branches running along like this, including this one that runs parallel and underneath the sartorius. These are all the branches of the femoral nerve. They're mostly underneath the quadriceps muscles and are not visible superficially, except up near the top where I have the bold line. Right? You can see the femoral nerve on this image from the lab right here, right? And coming down, that's the saphenous portion of it, but you just know this is the femoral nerve. And if you look on the model here, this is a photograph of the lower limb model in medial view. It might look a little odd because the gastrocnemius and the soleus have been removed, as well as the sartorius. And we can see the femoral nerve up here at the top I'm circling it in purple right now, or circling it in yellow right now, and you can see its branch extends down this way, and then underneath the quadriceps femoris muscles. Right? So you can see just a small part of it right in there, running parallel to the femoral vein and artery. And lastly, we get to the sciatic nerve. Again, working from left to right, we can see the sciatic nerve right here. Right? It originates from the sacral plexus, and it comes out or emerges below a muscle called the piriformis. Some people who have sciatica, which is a condition where the sciatic nerve is compressed and it causes pain and numbness and tingling on their posterior and lower limb. Some people actually get a little bit of relief from stretching or having work done on the piriformis muscle. The sciatic nerve is actually two nerves. It is the tibial nerve and the common fibular nerve, and as you move through the thigh region, those two nerves are wrapped up in the same connective tissue sheath, forming the sciatic nerve proper. Down here in the popliteal region, in other words, your knee pit, that is when the sciatic nerve splits into the tibial branch and the common fibular branch. And so you can see the sciatic nerve on the diagram right there, right? And right there, running through the posterior thigh, and then it branches into its two constituents there and there, right? And we're just going to refer to this whole thing as the sciatic nerve. You don't really see it on this model because the hamstrings are blocking it. Right? You would have to take the hamstring muscles off in order to see the sciatic nerve below.